Okay, this is an interview with John Balick. First interview that we're doing is honey morphine. I have some props here, my brother. Okay, do you want to say anything as inaugural first interview?
Actually, no. I'd rather just get right into get right in and get my hands dirty.
Okay, let's do it. When and where were you born?
I was born in Pennsylvania, in Sharon, actually, which is close to Pittsburgh. Outside of Pittsburgh, it's a small Sharon Steel. It was a steel community close to Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which Newcastle at one time was considered
Was considered what?
the tin capital of the world, I believe. So, it was very industrial in the 60s, 70s.
70s? You were born in 1970?
Yeah. No. 72.
72. Okay. What did your parents do for a living?
Father worked as a welder at a place called Pullman Standard. Welded railroad cars. And my mother was just always a housewife.
When did you first realize that you were going to become an artist?
It's an interesting question because I actually never remember a time in my life when I wasn't an artist. So it was the earliest I can remember, I was always fascinated by art and drawing. And yeah, it's just something that I always knew that's what I was going to do. There was really no question. So earliest, I don't know if I could even say an age. Yeah, I don't think I could even say an age as long as I can remember.
Tell us about your work.
A lot of the newer work has really been evolved from pieces that I was working on actually when I was in college, and I started working with some elements of fire, doing these very visceral paintings on plywood.
Visceral.
Very textural, tactile, very stuff you could touch. It was very much tangible, very thick surfaces, lots of tars and waxes, and was also burning into the surface of the plywood, and just really working on elements of texture, figuring out what other elements I could use to
in
create
the painting.
Yeah, in the painting. And so a few years ago I was working on some pieces again with using fire as an element, but those pieces were I guess the fire was a very minor element, and I wanted the fire to be more of a major element in the pieces. And I was using a torch to make the markings, and didn't quite give me the markings that I wanted because, like I said, it was a minor element. It was almost like there were abstract paintings, acrylic paintings primarily, with a little bit of an element of burning or fire. And I realized that if I really wanted these to be fire paintings, I wanted the fire to be a major element. And I had a table in the studio up against the wall, and I was working on some pieces, smaller pieces, and leaning the paintings up against the wall when I was working on these smaller pieces. And I was using the torch, and I was burning onto the pieces, and as I was burning onto the pieces, I saw that there was some smoke and some soot that would kind of go up the side of the piece, and it would hit the wall actually, and the wall was painted white, and it left this mark on the wall. I just thought it's interesting. And it kind of reminds me of in that movie Pollock, where it's after he leaves New York City and he's living in the country, and I believe it was somewhere in Long Island, and he's painting in this old woodshed, and there's one part where they actually, you see him painting, and he drips some paint on the floor, and he looks down, and then the camera kind of pans down, and you see the drips there too, and you realize like he kind of has his little epiphany, yeah, of his splatter paintings or his action painting. And that's sort of what happened with working on the smaller pieces and leaning them up against the wall, and that leaving that mark on the wall. And I realized that all this time I was either burning on the surface with a torch, or I would lie the pieces on the floor of the studio and burn on top of the pieces, where I realized what I needed to do was to actually invert the pieces, turn them upside down, and the fire actually started to become another element. Instead of using the torches, I started letting the fire do its own thing. So when I'm creating the pieces, I know the section of the piece that I want. If I want more of a darker area somewhere, I know that's where I'm going to put my fuel that I use to burn the piece. I can't completely control it, and I like that little element of chaos in there, but I can control it in the fact of I know roughly where the darker areas are going to be, but the markings that are left are completely up to the fire and where the wind is blowing at that moment, how it's coming down through the alleyway where I'm working on the pieces, and it just adds more of a natural element to the pieces. And the thing I really like is no one has really worked with fire and paint. There's been artists that have worked with fire in the past. There's a Chinese artist, I don't recall his name right now, but he's primarily known for firework installations, and he does some pieces with gunpowder where he'll do a portrait. Sometimes he'll do pieces that are more abstract, but mostly I've seen him do portraits. He'll lay out gunpowder, like basically draw a portrait with gunpowder and then light it, and it singes the paper. But no one's mixed fire and paint together before.
So I've seen your work, and this is the first time I've ever heard you describe your process.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that what you're doing is using fire as both pigment and the brush.
Yeah. Yeah, it's creating its own markings. It's definitely creating its own element.
So what inspires you to paint or create on a particular subject? What either subject matter inspires you to paint at all?